All right. Well, thank you for having me today. I am very delighted to be here. My name is Brianna Parsons. I'm a veterinarian, an educator, and a lecturer at Penn Vet. I'm also the co-founder and director of Fair Farms Gambia. And I'm here today to talk about work we've done feeding food waste to rabbits in the Gambia. So let me start off by telling you what Fair Farms Gambia is. And I think the best way to think about it is that it's an entrepreneurial approach to real life research. We use entrepreneurship for problem solving, such that we're creating initiatives that are trying to test agricultural change making in action. So what that means, we think about how poverty, malnutrition, food insecurity, environmental degradation, how all of these issues are interlinked, how food systems are system dependent. And we think the best way to study them is to create initiatives that try to make change and study how that change occurs. So we started in 2016, this picture you can see here, as a kind of humble demonstration and research farm called Gambia Goat Dairy. We scaled into this entrepreneurial research collaboration with Penn Vet, a novel community-based organization working with an academic institution to become Fair Farms Gambia. We started with goat dairy, we moved into horticulture and fruit trees, we were doing rabbit raising, silvopasture as a climate change resiliency strategy, crop and fodder production, and we were also composting manure. And now, since 2022, we've been exploring this model for co-creation of agricultural solutions using social entrepreneurship in Botswana. And so really what Fair Farms tries to do at the end of the day is promote our vision that we seek a fair world where everyone is nourished, well, and thriving, where agriculture is part of the solution and food brings us together, it stewards our earth, and it celebrates our diverse global cultures. We have a research to impact approach, and we really welcome collaboration around our goals, which are improving nutrition, maternal and child health through animal source foods, inclusive economic development and poverty alleviation through agriculture, community empowerment and resiliency, food security and food sovereignty, interrelated but not necessarily dependent concepts, and environmental. And so our hypotheses are that an inclusive food system can spur inclusive economic development with secondary benefits on improving human health and nutrition, community empowerment, and environmental stewardship. And that's a very kind of food sovereignty approach of putting the means of production in the hands of the people. We also see that social entrepreneurship applied to food systems and sustainable agriculture can be a solution building methodology, especially around climate change and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. But you can see in this figure here, all of the goals that are touched by inclusive agriculture when designed with systems thinking. And lastly, we see that social entrepreneurship can increase the uncertainty of scientific studies, but we can control for risk. And by doing so, we are really leading to actionable research outcomes that are pressure tested under the current socioeconomic conditions so that they're really ready to go. They've been tested in those conditions. And so as far as this study goes, first, just to think about sustainability, this is an agricultural sustainability framework I use in a class called One Health and Global Food Security to teach about sustainability. And we teach about it as overlapping factors of economic, environmental, and social factors, all influenced by geopolitical and sociopolitical forces. So food waste is an economic and environmental issue, like we've talked about, that can impact our social well-being. However, food waste literature in the Gambia is very sparse. There's some estimates that about 35% of food is wasted pre-consumer in the harvesting, transport, and processing stages, but data collection, especially in low and middle income countries, is expensive, so there's not a lot of detail here for us. Our lived experience, and here's a picture of Tangi Market where we were collecting food waste, is that there is quite significant waste. Mangoes during mango season, fish, vegetables, lettuce, carrot, tomatoes, cabbage, peppers, and different fruits, bush fruits, again, mangoes and citrus fruits are really wasted. And livestock feed is a critical challenge, especially during the dry season. So there is opportunity for using food waste for animal feed. You can see in this picture of Tangi Market, here's a huge pile of waste, and here are all the sellers who are selling food each day. And so we've talked about where food loss and food waste occurs in some of the other presentations. There's production and processing stages, which really in countries like the Gambia with underdeveloped livestock value chains, and even horticulture value chains, a lot of the waste is occurring in these stages. The waste that we are interested in here is coming directly from these sellers who you could say are retail sellers. They're getting these fruits and vegetables from the farmers, from the producer, and they're really processing them there as is. They're selling these vegetables as they are, ripping off anything that's blemished, and that's the food loss that we are collecting. So food value chains look different in different places, and the waste that we are getting in the study is really coming in between this processing and retail stage. So what did we do in this pilot study? We fed rabbits food waste for 2 years, and first I'll just say that rabbits are used for pets and food in the Gambia. There's a growing affluent population that's really interested in pet rabbits, but also the meat is very high in iron, it's high in B vitamins, it's high in complete proteins, and that's valuable for this nutritionally, for the challenges that the Gambia is experiencing nutritionally, where they have rates of over 50% of women of reproductive age having iron deficiency, anemia, and a quarter of their kids having stunting malnutrition from protein and micronutrient deficiencies. So it's valuable for some of the challenges faced here. There are few rabbit breeders in the country, so that's a value chain limitation. We've gotten imported New Zealand's and Angola's, but a lot of folks are looking for other breeds as well. And so what I'm going to share with you is information from when we raised 2 rabbits in the Gambia for 2 years. We fed them various combinations of food waste, and we had internal herd growth as well as the purchase of 3 additional rabbits, such that we're now raising 7 rabbits on the farm. Our assumptions for the productivity models that I'm going to get into are listed here. Relevant rabbit production system information. We've got minimums and maximums as well as the numbers that we used. We often chose conservative estimates, but I think things to look at are gestation length of rabbits is 31 days. If you have a voluntary wait period in between breedings of 30 days, you can have very quick turnaround in litters for these animals. We chose 4 rabbits as our bunnies per litter size, but it can be upwards of 15 bunnies per litter, and varied revenue amounts depending on how you sell them. Then the last thing I'll show you is this daily rabbit diet costs. This is real data from us feeding rabbits over 2 years. We were mostly feeding them potato leaf, some carrot, cabbage and lettuce, and hay. When we got the cabbage and carrot food waste, that was able to directly replace the potato leaf in some instances. So you can see the proportions of each diet, their costs, and then we made a total cost for purchase feed and for food waste feeding, which you can see in US dollars here. We've got the Gambian Dalasi amount as well, is 40 cents per rabbit per day versus 7 cents per rabbit per day. So that's an actual cost savings where our food waste diet was 17.5% of the cost of purchased feeds. So now getting into our results from our food waste collection, we collected and weighed amounts of food waste from 2 different sellers, and we selected for rabbit edible products like carrots, lettuce, cabbage, and carrots. Excuse me. I'm trying to fix the video on here. I know it's a recording. I don't think my video is getting recorded, but maybe that'll be fine. But anyways, the results, we collected food waste from 2 different sellers in Tangi Market over 3 weeks. We have our raw amounts listed here, and we were only collecting rabbit edible products, which were carrots, lettuce, and cabbage. You can see all the raw amounts as well as our statistics. So the mean amount was 12.5 pounds of food waste with a standard deviation of 6 pounds. The median amount we collected was 10 pounds of food waste with a maximum of 28 and a minimum of 5.2. We had very minimum spoilage. So the maximum waste we were taking out was about 5%. We were weighing that. It was mostly turnip scraps, which we weren't feeding to the rabbits, but were collected in the same containers as the carrot scraps. And sometimes if the food was stored in plastic bags, which it was often given to us in, if it was hot for a long time, there could be spoilage of the lettuce and the cabbage because of that. We collected from 2 sellers in Tangi Market, but that market in the Gambia has over 200 sellers. So if you just do some back of the napkin math, you can imagine there's 1,250 pounds of daily waste coming out of there. It could be much higher, it could be much smaller, but that's all lost money, lost time, and lost nutritional resources. And Tangi Market is one of hundreds of markets in the Gambia, so this food waste problem can be quite large. Now onto the economic results. We did an estimated cost of production for a year of raising rabbits and selling bunnies with 2 productivity scenarios, a high productivity scenario of selling 24 baby bunnies and a low productivity scenario of selling 12 baby bunnies over the year. We had 2 treatments that are included in here, which is food waste feeding or completely purchased feeding, and I'll go through the numbers with you of how things change for each of those treatments. We have the same investment costs around the board, which is the bunnies, the housing, everything you might need. Feed costs change depending on whether it's purchased feed or whether it's food waste feeding, and it changes with the productivity scenarios because there's different amounts of bunnies to feed. Revenue changes as well because revenue is dependent on bunnies sold. So the first thing I can show you is profit. So profit is just looking at revenue minus all of the expenses. In the purchase feed scenario, the annual feed costs are quite high, the investment costs are high, so we did not make a profit using purchase feed. However, with food waste feeding, where we drop the cost to 1/3 of baseline feeding, which you should note during our real data, we saw that that cost can be spared to 17.5%. So again, we're using a conservative estimate here to say 1/3 of baseline for the food waste feeding costs. But food waste feeding in both productivity scenarios is able to profit in the first year. The other thing we looked at was net cash flow. So net cash flow takes out investments and just looks at how does cash flow through the business over the year. As you can see, you can positively cash flow in both of the high productivity scenarios, but you're unable to cash flow with purchased food in the low productivity scenario. Your costs are too high and your revenue is too low. Then the last thing here is payback period, and that looks at, based on your cash flow, how long would it take you to pay back the initial investment? So this 7,566 loan. You can pay it back in under a year for both food waste scenarios. You cannot pay back that loan for low productivity purchase feeds, and it takes you 3.5 years to pay it back with purchase feeds and high productivity. So a couple of things we found from this too is that you need to recognize a need for smallholder financing programs if you wanted to enhance rabbit rearing. That's why we are in Fair Farms, is to promote smallholder solutions. And so 7,600 Dalasi is more than monthly wages for many Gambians, so there would need to be some kind of finance program to support this. You'd also need to complete the value chain with different inputs like rabbit waterers or hay feeders, or even producing pelleted feed, since none of those currently exist in the Gambia. And you should also consider market creation for any kind of smallholder before they go into this to make sure if they're producing 24 bunnies, where are they marketing those 24 bunnies? The other thing to say too is that these productivities are quite low estimates. You could easily have upwards of 50 baby bunnies per year from a high productivity management system. So there's a lot of potential for economic returns here. Then I just have a few photos from us managing the food waste, because with entrepreneurial research, you get into something and it exposes problems. It's up for you to figure out how to solve them. So we were often having the issue of having more food waste than we could feed our rabbits, and we wanted to preserve it. We didn't want to waste it. So we utilized the Gambian hot sun and used the sun to dry it and preserve it. A lot of the waste you can see here in this picture were carrots. They were shredded, getting all of the brown off of there, and so you could dry that easily in the sun. We also had browning lettuce and cabbage, but you can see by these pictures, Gambians have very high standards, so it was often very good food. We would often leave that out in the sun to dry as well. Then there's also relationships that can be built with the food sellers that give you opportunities to buy large quantities of food waste or second qualities for cheap. So here's, I think, 5 kilograms of carrots that we bought for 100 Dalasi one time, whereas market retail is 1 kilogram for 100 Dalasi. And so there's also an opportunity here for women in gardening to raise rabbits for household income and or self-sufficiency, especially if they're already in gardening. These food waste could be a way to add income with the scrap that you have. Just a quick management upgrades as we grew in rabbit breeding. We started out with these cages. Each one of the 3 took about a day to make. We used a lot of scrap wood from the goat farm, so it probably cost us around 2,300 Dalasi, but that might be an underestimate. And just recently, we've built this 12-house, 2-story rabbit cage. It cost $22,500, a full week of labor. We imported these water bottles from the US, which was like almost $10,000. And so if you wanted to do a package for smallholders to start up, you would really need about $550 to get everything to get into rabbit breeding. And I'll note too, there's corrugate under each of the rabbit cages so that their poop and pee comes down a slant and it's collected with the PCV pipe so we can use all of that for composting to make fertilizers and manure. Next steps, we're all about promoting sustainability solutions in the Gambia. So rabbit rearing with food waste is a pro-poor, pro-women livestock production system if you're integrating them where they're already at in the horticulture value chain. You need financing programs, skill sharing, and access to inputs and development of reliable markets. To cut your feed costs, you can do homegrown crops. That's another way to go about it, or use the food waste like we're showing. I think what we're really showing here too is that this is an environmental sustainability solution by repurposing food waste, but the primary incentive for the farmer is economic. The rabbit breeder is really going to care about their business success. So this is economically driven, but there are positive downstream outcomes from this, like positive nutritional outcomes of more meat, environmental outcomes of food waste reduction, and economic outcomes of increased incomes in developing a new rabbit breeding sector. So this work supports the fair farms hypotheses. And at the same time, as repurposing food waste into livestock feed, like we've been advocating for, there still needs to be food waste reduction at the sources, getting more of that food to hungry people. So I'll just end with a few acknowledgements. Thank you again to the conference organizers and our funding partners, Rotary Clubs, Rock Flower Fund, Penn Global, and Penn Vet, who's been our institutional partner for many years now. And just a quick photo of myself and co-founder Sule Kamara. This is when we were in Botswana visiting the Okavango Delta. This should be a river, but you can see there are cattle drinking out of man-made boreholes because of climate change. And this picture just sums up why action is so important. So thank you so much. Stop share.